was a pro-life movement within the Libertarian Party. When I was there, I really wasn't part of it until I ran for Congress. And then as people started asking me questions about it, I started thinking about it deeply. It wasn't anything I'd ever really thought about in my personal life. And at that time, partial birth abortion was beginning. And once I looked at that, because people asked me, well, would you support partial birth abortion? And I looked at it and it's like, wow. When I looked at the procedure, I said, this is just murdering a baby. This is murdering a full-term baby. No, I'm not for that. And that was the beginning of my change. Actually, running for office changed me. So, yeah, people can change their positions on things. I'm not really so sure that William Weld has come around. He supported an assault weapons ban. You know, he comes back and he tells the people at the Libertarian Party, he says, well, I'm a lifelong hunter and gun owner. As a governor of Massachusetts, I went along with some modest restrictions on certain types of firearms. Other people would call that an assault weapon ban, okay? But he calls it modest restrictions on certain types of firearms, okay? Talk about a politician. Talk about throwing this stuff around. I mean, it is flying fast and furious from these guys. He says, I was deeply concerned about gun violence, and frankly, the people I represented were demanding action. So there you go. If the mob wants to take your gun, William Weld said, hey, I'm with the mob. I don't really care about your God-given rights. I don't really care about the Constitution that prohibits that. Yeah, the majority of people want to take it. See, that's the living document view of the Constitution. We don't really care what it says. It's just words. And we don't really want to be caught up with words that much. We're going to just go with what we think it should be. And he says, sometimes governing involves tough choices. I had to make more than a few of those. Today, 25 years later, I would make some different choices. Notice he doesn't say that he is just unqualified support for individual liberty. That's the problem. And that's the choice that is being faced by the libertarians this weekend. Are they going to lose the fight for individual liberty? You know, when he talks about being socially liberal and fiscally conservative, understand that the Republicans are not fiscally conservative. They are engineering the economy. And the Democrats are not socially tolerant. They're very intolerant. They want to engineer the economy just as the Republicans want to, with crony capitalism, engineer the economy for their benefit. The Democrats want to engineer our bathrooms even, okay, down to that level. They want to engineer everything so that they are in control. We need to not play into that. We need to not say, well, I'm Republican on this issue and Democrat on that issue. We need to just say we're about individual liberty. That's what the founder said. Just say, I'm about liberty, and I will take liberty before safety. I will take liberty before prosperity. Give me liberty or give me death. And I don't really care about your pragmatic arguments about safety or prosperity. I want freedom, because if I give up my liberty to get any of that you're promising me, I will never be, as a slave, prosperous. I will never, as a slave, be safe. So I don't really care about those arguments. Liberty comes first, second, third, last, always, okay? Now, let's talk about how, and we haven't covered this in detail. We mentioned it at the beginning of the week because this came out over the weekend. Washington Post singling out one individual in Oregon, B.J. Soper. This was featured on the Drudge Report for quite a while. Primed to fight the government, a fast-growing U.S. movement aimed with guns and the Constitution. How horrible is that? You're armed with guns and the Constitution. Sounds like a bunch of bitter clingers, doesn't it? Sees a dire threat to liberty. You bet. You bet. We see a dire threat to everything in this country. We see a dire threat to property rights everywhere when the government can come in and confiscate property rights that loggers, miners, ranchers have had, water rights, surface rights, mining rights, logging rights, to shut down the economy in the rural areas, that they would violate property rights and deeds that have been in force for over a century and a half, that they would come in with a pen and just declare that they are going to take over millions of acres in state after state after state, which is what Obama is doing. Now, I wanted to play for you. I'm not going to go over this whole article. It's a very long article. You should look at it. And, of course, they come after them trying to make him look dangerous because he's got his family there as they're training with firearms. And quite frankly, folks, that is not a dangerous thing. If you're going to have firearms, you need to have your kids. There he is. Isn't that awful? He's got a 16-year-old who is shooting a rifle, and he's got a young child, their 4-year-old, watching the destructive power of a rifle so she doesn't play with it. That's what you want to do with your kids. You want to be able to defend yourselves, and you want to make sure that kids don't think that this is a toy, because in Hollywood, they like to show very reckless uses of guns. So it's a good thing as a parent for you to show responsible uses of guns. But anyway, they try to demonize him in another number of ways. They say he believes in Agenda 21 and a lot of things that they just dismiss as conspiracy theories. Yeah, they call it the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development now. It's still a UN agenda. They have rebranded it, and that's what they're talking about. So whenever they talk about sustainability, folks are talking about what we've been talking, those of us who've been looking at it for a long time still call it Agenda 21, because that, quite frankly, is what it is. But one of the things that I wanted to focus on here is the back and forth between, they have a video embedded in the article where they actually let the man, B.J. Soper, talk. And then they have a rebuttal from a law professor. So I want to play both of those, and I'm going to talk a little bit over them. Let's play that first one from B.J. Soper, where he talks about the constitutional issues as if it mattered. Let's play that.
Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 17. To exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district not exceeding 10 square miles as may, by cession of a particular state and the acceptance of Congress to become the seat of the government of the United States. Obviously, they're talking about Washington, D.C. here. So it continues on as, and to exercise like authority over all places purchased by the consent of the legislature of the state, in which the same shall be, for the erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. So how I interpret this is that in order for the federal government to manage public lands, or to own public lands as it may be, they need to do three things. They need to get the consent of the legislature of the state that the land resides in. They need to pay for it. And they also need to use it for these specific purchases to erect forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. It's very clear that that is the limit of the federal government's ownership of lands within.
Absolutely. He lays it out precisely. He reads it for them, and he says, and of course, now this is what it means. You know, it means that we're talking 10 square miles. That's Washington, D.C. They need to get the permission from the states' legislatures if they're going to take this land. They need to pay for the land that they take. And they need to use it for these stated purposes, like creating forts or ports or those sorts of things. So then the Washington Post goes to this law professor. His name is Louis Steidman, and this is what he has to say.
His reading of the words is not the only possible reading, maybe not even the most natural reading. Beyond that, you know, there are complicated issues about federal land management.
Hold it right there. Hold it right there. Okay. His reading of the words is not the only possible meaning of the words. See, this is the way that they like to deconstruct things. Okay. It's the postmodern arguments here where they come in and say, you know, the words don't really mean what you think. 10 square miles, that could mean anything. Forts, ports, that could mean anything. Paying for the land, that doesn't really mean anything. This law professor is putting out the idea that is being sold by the Supreme Court and most of the people in the universities now. There was an article on Drudge Today, and I forget what the percentage was, but it was in the high 80s. I think, or maybe it was 82% if I remember correctly now. 82%, I think, of all the law professors, or was it lawyers, are Democrats. But the bottom line is, this is what they're teaching in the law schools. They're teaching words don't really mean anything. If words don't mean anything, then we can't have a discussion, can we? If everything is just subjective and it's whatever I say it means, then what are we even talking about? But then he goes on to try to make an argument. So first he tries to muddy the water by saying, well, you know, that's just words. I'm not going to debate those words. I'm not going to say, well, okay, what he's talking about there in the Constitution, this is the way that I understand. He's not going to even interpret it. He just doesn't care. He says, well, you know, we could look at other things. Let's continue on with what he has to say with this.
To be debated and thought about.
But he's not going to debate it.
Obvious the federal government should own as much land as it does currently. But if you want a really bizarre way of settling that dispute, It would be trying to figure out what words written 250 years ago by people who are no longer alive.
We just can't know. We just can't know. Stay with us. We're going to keep on with this. We're going to tell you what Marvel Comics says. It's impossible to know what words like forts and ports meant because they were written 200 years ago. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. In our final segment, I'm David Knight. Before we go back to this law professor saying that we can't possibly understand the words of the Constitution, I want to remind you that we've extended the sale for Survival Shield X2 Nascent Iodine, 20% off. We've extended that sale through this weekend only, and then it will be ending. We've had that on sale for, I think, probably about a week. We do have Super Male Vitality back in stock. It has been out for over a month. It is now back in stock at InfoWarsLife.com, so check those out. Again, 20% off InfoWars Survival Shield X2 Nascent Iodine. That's our 99.99% pure iodine salt. Crystals come from deep within the earth. It's in a very easy form to take. It's in liquid form, so you don't have to swallow pills or do anything like that. I love having these liquid supplements that are great quality like that. Get it for 20% off at InfoWarsLife.com. Now, again, this is from the article that was put out this last weekend by the Washington Post. They talked to a guy, B.J. Soper. He was very concerned about the direction our country was headed. He saw what the government is doing in terms of stealing land, in terms of tearing up treaties with people that they made. That's what these property rights are. You know, they're not saying that they own the land. This is the way it's being spun by the urban media. The same person can have mining. You can have multiple people on the same piece of land, can have water rights, surface rights, or mining rights, okay, on the same piece of land. Three people could have property rights, and those are just different forms of property rights, even logging rights. All of those could be on the same piece of land. Somebody could be taking out the dead wood, making the place safer so you don't have uncontrolled fires. At the same time, someone else is mining below it. At the same time, somebody else is grazing cattle on it. You can have multiple uses of this that benefit everybody. But the government would rather burn the economy down in the rural areas. And you got Obama with his pen taking millions of acres of land. And so the response from this guy, when he sees what happened with the Bundy Ranch, when he sees what's happening in Oregon, his response is to create an educational group, Central Oregon Constitutional Guard. They tried to make him look like a demon by talking to the Southern Poverty Law Center, the people who actually, these people, before he founded the Southern Poverty Law Center, the founder defended the Ku Klux Klan during the Civil Rights era. That was the only thing that he got involved in, and they had the audacity to call it the Southern Poverty Law Center. He never worked for civil rights. He simply defended the Ku Klux Klan. And so this is a guy who is out there trying to make everybody look dangerous. But they show that he is going out educating people, and we had this back and forth. First, he has a video where he talks about his understanding of the Constitution. Then this law professor comes in. I want to pick this up. He's telling everybody that you can't possibly understand what's in the Constitution. Listen to this.
It would be trying to figure out what words written 250 years ago by people who are no longer alive and who had some very odd ideas about things.
He doesn't like their ideas.
Would you say that the sweeping clause would be something that would, in some way, give the government the power to own large tracts of land?
The sweeping clause.
Well, as usual.
Okay. All right, let's hold it right there. Look, they've got all these clauses. They've got the Commerce Clause. They've got the Sweeping Clause. They've got supremacy clauses. All these are the Commerce Clause. They use all these different arguments. Well, you know what? Every time they do that, you have to point out to them that the 9th and 10th Amendment superseded any of those things, even if that was the correct interpretation of it, and it's not. Okay, the Commerce Clause would say we're going to have free trade with the United States, and yet you've got the government saying you can't have competition across state lines with insurance companies. They shut down that trade. And then they use the Commerce Clause to say, but no, we can regulate all the rest of your economic activity. It's a total fraud. The 9th and 10th Amendment superseded that. That's what he was saying. That's the lies that they feed you. And I didn't have time to go into what Marvel Comics is doing. They got the Red Skull out there making common cause with these poor people that the government is attacking out there, showing them as the victims. This is Goodwin's Law because this is the guy who represents Hitler in a very obvious way, saying he's got common cause with these cowboys out there. Join us tonight, 7 Central, 8 p.m. Eastern for the Nightly News.